Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of History and Gaming Alexandria. This is Mike, your host. And over the weekend, we participated in the National Museum of the United States Army's annual Army Game Day event at the National U.S. Army Museum in Fort Belvoir, Virginia, which is a fantastic event that has been run 2 years in a row so far. And our event this year was very successful. We ran Ruthless, an American Civil War out west scenario, which featured a Confederate rebel cavalry raid on a Union-held town, which was a fantastic scenario. We had some great players and a lot of fun running this one. And you could see the pictures here. I'll walk you through a bit of an after-action report on the scenario, as well as show you some video and footage of other games. There are some fantastic war games on display and some fantastic other GMs or game masters apart from myself running games for the National Army Museum this year. And all in all, it was a really fun day and a fun event. And so our game was designed with 2 to 4 or even 5 players in mind. It featured a Confederate cavalry raid on a Union-held town in the Western theater of the American Civil War, and the Confederate players had an option to take a mounted squadron of rebel cavalry as well as a dismounted squad, and to explore fire and maneuver tactics with them. There's also a sniper unit that I wrote special rules for use in this scenario, and so the Confederates had access to a sharpshooter, which you could see in the photos of the game as well, and that gave them a certain advantage and ability to try to pick off Union troops. There was a unique mechanic that I worked into this game using randomized miniature cards. Ruthless, as you may know, is a card-driven game. In other words, both initiative, who goes and in what order, as well as some other actions and your ability to enhance your unit's movement and fighting capabilities are all card-driven in Ruthless. So it's a very interesting system that way that builds in a lot of friction and command and control issues for your characters, for your units in the game. And being a skirmish level game, it has that air of battlefield friction and unpredictability built into it, which is really great for small scale Civil War actions, especially raids like this one. And so what I did was to have three miniature cards placed face down, one of them being a joker and 2 of them being just other cards. And as the Confederate players approached these cards, as they came within, let's say, 4 inches of them, the Confederate unit could overturn the card. And when they find the joker, that would reveal a Union Zouave sentinel or guard who could fire a single aimed shot at the Confederates. And only at that point would the Union then begin to activate. So effectively, it starts out as a one-player game, with the Confederates essentially engaging a sort of patrol phase where they're approaching the town and the Union are not able to respond and move until they uncover the sentinel, until they uncover, the face-down playing cards by approaching them within 4 inches. And so that happened relatively quickly, I would say within the second turn or so of this particular game. And the Zouave guard fired off a shot or 2, but was pretty quickly overwhelmed, I believe, by the dismounted troops in this action, whereas the mounted troops were able to pour through the gap where there was no sentinel. There was a gap in the stone walls, which you could see guarding the town, and the rebel cavalry pretty aggressively swept through that gap and into the town, where they put some serious damage and some serious hurting on whatever Union troops were not in cover that were milling about the town. The Union definitely took some casualties, and the rebel cavalry, as cavalry often was, proved to be aggressive, but it proved to be a bit of a glass hammer, because once the cavalry finished their initial onslaught, perhaps killed, I would say, knocked out about 3 Union troops that were positioned around the front of the town. The Union forces that were further back especially those that were able to get to cover, started to open fire on the rebels pretty effectively. And I would say at least 50% of the rebel cavalrymen were put out of action within about a turn of that happening. So you had this initial shock and awe, this initial, you know, impact of the rebel cavalry sweep through that section of the town. But once the Union were able to pull back and organize and open a more disciplined fire at them, that rebel cavalry was really stopped cold in its tracks. At least we found in this scenario, in this instance of the game. The rebel dismounted troops were much more conservative. They were certainly slower, but more deliberative and more determined in their advance. They certainly approached the town step by step, firing, moving slowly, using the sniper for fire support to sort of cover their advance and taking advantage of the chaos that was sown by the cavalry. And they moved in on the far left side of the board near the long barn building, and they were able to get into some of the buildings once they crossed the fences, opened fire at Union troops that were in the area, not with as much effect as the cavalry initially, but they were crucially able to seize loot tokens. There were diamonds, for instance, hidden in the outhouse. There were gold bars and chocolate and whiskey hidden in other buildings, such as the Long Barn. And so they were able to use their numbers and their sort of slow, deliberate advance to loot the buildings and move into the town, while trying to fend off the Union troops, who at this point were in harder cover. One element of the rules that I had written into it, and this is my own mechanic, was the stagecoach, which the rebel forces could set on fire by spending an activation to do so, and use their movement actions to move the stagecoach, say 4 inches a turn, and attempt to shove it or drive it into any of the buildings occupied by federal troops that they wanted. And so that would give them the opportunity to smoke the federal troops out of any buildings where they had, out of a building where they had taken refuge or set up a key defense. The trade-off being that any loot tokens in that building would be lost to the rebels. And so that was something for them to think about, but it added an extra dynamic to the game, that possibility of the rebels lighting the stagecoach on fire and rolling it into a building in order to smoke them out, basically. And so that definitely was a cool element, I felt, and I'd like to definitely use that again when I run this scenario next time. I think it's a lot of fun. And again, it was a successful scenario, and I look forward to doing it again, but very happy with the results at the museum this weekend. And I'll show you some images of other great war games that were run at this year's event. First, there is a really fantastic 28mm tabletop game based upon the Battle of Savannah from the American War of Independence or Revolutionary War, which was really the U.S. Army's first coalition battle. It was waged alongside the French in conjunction with French forces against a British force occupying Savannah. The famous Polish commander, well known in the U.S., especially during this period, Kazimierz Pulaski, was killed in this battle, and so it's a very significant and interesting wargaming scenario, and it looked very good. It certainly had a lot of players and good participation, and you could see some images of that great game here as well. Very interesting, very nice figures also. And my friend Jeff from History in Miniature put on his Spanish-American war game, and this is a fantastic scenario that I've helped him playtest in the past. He's run this at other wargaming conferences as well in the past. I believe some HMGS conventions, such as Historicon, if I'm not mistaken. It's a very interesting period. He has some amazing figures that he's put together and terrain that he's put together for this assault by the Rough Riders and other American forces, with historical personalities mixed in, such as Teddy Roosevelt, I believe William Randolph Hearst, reporters and other little scenes and vignettes, which really gives his game, in my view anyway, a lot of character and personality. And of course, the Spanish forces are really well painted and represented as well, including naval infantry and other Spanish Empire troops. And again, a great addition to the lineup at Army Game Day at Fort Belvoir this year. And you could see images of that Spanish-American war game using, if I'm not mistaken, Blood and Valor, the rule set Blood and Valor by Firelock Games. And there are other fantastic scenarios that were set up. Dark's Game Room, I believe, put on a scenario for the Battle of Cowpens from the American Revolutionary War using one of their rule systems, which was very interesting. And all in all, I hope these pictures give you a good idea of the venue, of the other games that were on display. The museum is just a fantastic facility, and we're really blessed that they were able to put on this event and use the space for historical wargaming. And it was just a fantastic day, and a lot of great war games on display for the public to come by and see and participate in, whether they were just passing through or had signed up for a game in advance. It was just a great opportunity for people to experience historical wargaming, to learn something new, and for more seasoned gamers to come out and really enjoy some impressive scenarios. And I'll leave you with some more images of the event. Again, our scenario, Ruthless, being adapted to an American war, fast-paced cavalry raid scenario was just, I think, entertaining. It was interesting. It was historically certainly accurate, and I think it portrayed the speed, the surprise, the elements of fire and maneuver that go into these types of operations, as well as some of the tactical and operational objectives where players were thinking about stealing supplies, about trying to recover intelligence documents, loot tokens, not simply shooting at each other, but trying to work in conjunction with each other as a team, certainly for the Confederates, mounted forces, dismounted forces, and for the Union, trying to pull scattered forces together to react to this and respond, recovering from the initial shock, and trying to do something to organize themselves and fight back and defend the town. I think the scenario is interesting. I would like to run it again. I think it has a lot of potential and is a lot of fun. So with that, I will leave you with a few more images of the event. They'll be running Army Game Day again next year. I'll certainly be participating as well. If you're in the Northern Virginia area, it's a fantastic facility. The National Museum of the U.S. Army in general is an impressive and wonderful museum. And from a historical wargaming perspective, Army Game Day is just a fantastic event for the D.C. and Northern Virginia area. So I encourage you all to come check out the National Museum of the U.S. Army, which is just a fantastic facility, and certainly to look out for the next Army Game Day, which is held every year. With that, I encourage you to keep on enjoying your hobby, keep on painting miniatures and rolling dice, and having a great time. Have a wonderful week, everybody, and see you in the next episode.